Hello, and today we're going to be building finger controls for our girl. So I have the IKFK switch version of my girl all set up and ready to go, right? All my controls are lined up, and I'm ready to go ahead and move on to building stuff up for the hands. We're going to build, some custom control curves that we can align to the hands, as well as a way to control a fist, or like a grip, or a finger curl control. So we'll be using, some very similar concepts, especially our match rotations technique that we did with our IKFK arm, right? So what we did to align those to the bones that we created. We'll also be using that custom attribute sort of skill that we'd looked at before. So adding our IKFK switch attribute or adding our toe tap and foot roll attributes. We'll be using that technique, as well as something new called a set driven key. So let's go ahead and get started and show you the process of doing so. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a control curve to represent my finger. As always, you can use just a classic NURB circle and, align it to our fingers once the time is right. You can also use a box, but I'm going to be using a circle pin, which I can get from my control curve script. So I'll click on that to open this up, and I will look for circle pin. And we'll also be using square pin a little bit later. And if you want to use like sphere pin as well, you totally could. Again, any shape works for this. Just make sure that if you choose one, stick with it. I'll go ahead and make a circle pin. So I'll select it and hit origin. And it's already put one here, the origin for me. And I'll go ahead and solo this out real quick. The good thing about the circle pin is that its pivot is down here at the bottom of it. So if we click our circle pin, we can grab it and rotate it, and it'll rotate around that point. But there is a much larger part to grab up here. That'll make it easier to grab our fingers. So that said, let's go ahead and align those to our finger bones. And using those same techniques that we've done before, we'll match transformations to get that rotation looking good. We'll use some groups to hold it and all that jazz. So I'll hide the visibility for my girl's geometry, change my move tool with W, and hold down V as in victory, and go ahead and grab this and drag this up further on the hand. And yeah, I'll change my background so we can see a little bit better. I'm going to snap this to the first knuckle of my index finger. And, if I bring my girl's geometry back, it looks like that the circle pin is way too large, right? So before I freeze transforms or do any match rotations, I'm just going to go ahead and change to my scale tool with R and scale down. We get something a little more respectable. And once we get this aligned up, if you think that the distance between, this pivot point where things are actually going to rotate and the rest of our circle is a little too large, we can slow this out. Right click on the curve and go over to control vertex. And as you see, we have a bunch of little pink, basically vertices that we can grab. I can drag a box to select, and I can smush this down in space if I want to make this a little bit shorter. And this isn't necessary, right? This is just changing how our curve looks and how we interact with it, but mechanically things don't change. And what I just went back there is that after I was in control vertex mode, I right clicked and held it down on the curve and went back to object mode. So I actually like that size a lot better. Again, that pivot is still at the very bottom of it, so that's where things are going to be lined up, and I like that. So let's go ahead and snap this back to the knuckle. And if I were to match rotations right now, right? So I'll even do that. Is that it comes off the surface of the finger, but it's not aligned how I would like it to. So I might, bake in a little bit of an extra transformation to help us there. And taking a look at this now, this might even be a little bit too short, so I might undo 2 before I smush that down. Yeah, that'll work. We'll go ahead and unsolo that. Again, snap it to the knuckle once I go into object mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on Y. And the way this works, right, is that now when I do that match transformations, it's going to be aligned with the way the finger bone is pointing, that little circle, so it'll be a little bit easier for us. So again, all I did there is that I scaled it down, I snapped it to the knuckle, and I rotated it, and I did all that before I froze transforms and did that match transformations thing. But now that I have this aligned where I'd like it, I'll go up to modify, down to freeze transformations. And lastly, like with our FK controls and even our IK control here, we will put this in its own group. So with my new curve selected, I'll hit Control G to group it, and I will again bring that pivot of my group to be in the exact same place as my actual pin. So I'll do a match transformations, match pivots. So I'll open this up and make sure that I have my group selected first, hold down Shift, grab my circle pin, and go up to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Pivots. Now if I click on my group, now my pivot is once again exactly in the center of this curve. It's in the exact same place. If I click between my group and my control curve, it's no longer in the origin. So now, like we did with our FK controls, right? If you recall, I'll even switch back here. Our control curves are clean, but the actual group that's holding them has that junk data in it. So we'll be using that same tactic here to have our group hold our junk data while we can still align this to the knuckle. So I'll go ahead and unhide this. It looks like I didn't actually snap this to the knuckle. I snapped it to the girl's hand. So I'll grab the group, hold down V, and drag it over to snap it to the knuckle. All right. And I do have a little bit of junk in my translate, so I'm going to modify freeze transforms. If you did that right the first time, there won't be any junk over here. But now let's go ahead and match transformations. So with my group selected, I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to grab the finger bone. And I'm going to go up to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Rotations. Now, if I go ahead and bring back my girl's geometry, I have this little pin coming off of my finger. That is exactly where that bone is, right? And it's aligned how it needs to be. But once I, constrain this up with an orient constraint, and you don't have to do this exactly at this point, I just want to show off what's going on here, is now that I grab this, I will still rotate it relative to the finger, which is exactly what we want. So I'll step back and I'll undo before I orient constrained, which should be right around here. Yep, great. And again, we have that group holding junk transformations for us, but if we click on the actual curve, all of our transforms in the channel box are clean. So let's go ahead and repeat that step for the rest of the finger. And I'll do this a couple of times, maybe go through the middle finger again, but then after that I'll speed up because we'll be repeating that same step for the whole hand. And after I do it, 6 times, hopefully we'll have the idea down. Right now I'll hide my girl's geometry again, and I'll grab my group and duplicate it. And before I go further, one thing I do want you to notice is that I haven't named everything yet. That's okay. I'm just going to use Comet to cheat a little bit and help me move a little bit quicker. But with my duplicated group, I want to go ahead and zero out those rotations, so I get rid of that junk data. I'll switch to my Move tool. I'll hold down V as in victory and snap it to the next knuckle. And again, I want to zero out those rotations, not freeze, right? I want to zero them out because I want to work as cleanly as I possibly can. Because we'll go through now that those are zeroed out and that this rotation is, relative to the world. Because you notice my Z, X, and Y axes are all, aligned with my grid and my view cube and my little axis indicator. There's no extra junk transformations here. And I'll freeze out the translate to make that so, because again, I just want to work as clean as possible. So with my group selected, I'll go up to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Now I'm zeroed out everywhere. Now I can go ahead and use that Match Transformations trick to bring back some junk into my Rotate group. So I'll select my group, hold down Shift, grab the bone that I want to align underneath it, to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Rotation. Now if we click on our group, we again have that junk data, but our translate is still clean. Our rotates are the only thing holding our junk data. And I'll actually change to object axis mode as well. Because if we click through and notice our pivot is also aligned up with the bone. So again, that's why our joint orientation matters, why we did that a while ago, is to get these lined up appropriately. So I'll go ahead and duplicate this group now that I have it lined up, and I'll repeat that step for the third knuckle. We won't put any controls on the fourth finger bone, right? Again, this is just to hold transformations for us because we're not really going to be able to do a ton with this. This will just make it so we basically have a fingertip that we can squish if we really want to. I'll go ahead and hide that geometry, repeat that step again where I grab my group, use Control D to duplicate it. And again, before I move it down, I'll go ahead and zero out those rotations. Now I'll hold down V as in victory, drag it down to the index knuckle. I have that junk in my translate now, right? And I want to get rid of that before I, put my rotations back and get them holding junk data again. So I'll go up to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Again, the whole point is that I want that group to hold junk data, and I do want it to be zeroed out across the board, to be frozen in transforms before I match rotations. Now it's zeroed out, I'll grab my group, hold down Shift and grab the bone that I want to match those transformations to, and I'll go up to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Rotation. And again, I do have that group 3 now is holding some junk data and rotate, but the translates are clean. Same goes for the other groups above it on our index figure. Great. So we've got our first finger controls aligned. What I will go ahead and do is I'll duplicate one of these groups and snap it to the next knuckle, and zero out its transforms. And I'm going to hide that for now. I just want to have one of those, controls ready to go before I finish up making these index finger controls. And again, if we bring back our girl's visibility, and I might even hide the joints at this point, is now that we have these lovely little pins that when we grab them and rotate them, we'll rotate our fingers forward with them as well. Let's go ahead and get those constraints on them going. We'll just be using orient constraints as per usual. And we'll go ahead and rename things up before I go much further, just so my constraints will have proper names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the curves first, use comment rename to get them, and then grab the groups after that and use comment rename to rename those as well. So I'll select my first circle pin, so this would be my index 1 control. I'll hold down control on my keyboard, grab the next circle pin, so that'd be index 2, and while still holding down control, I'll grab my next circle pin, or index 3. Let's open up comment rename, and I will use my add suffix as well as my rename and number. So I will go ahead and rename this to just LT underscore index, and because we have rename and number here, it'll add 1, 2, and 3. So if I click rename and number, only with those selected in the order that I did, right? Like I want to grab the first index 1 control first, hold down control, grab the index 2 second, hold down control and grab index 3 third, and I use rename and number. Now those are all named LT index 1, 2, and 3. And I will go ahead and add the suffix of just underscore CTL. And again, with that same selection maintained, I'll hit add suffix. So now I have comment rename tool, renaming things how I'd like. I'll repeat that step with my groups. So I'll grab my first group first, hold down control, grab the second group next, hold down control and grab group 3 last. And I'll use the same conventions, right? So it'll be LT index. I'll use rename and number. But instead of adding CTL to the end, I'll just add GRP. So we have all this named up nicely as we need it to be. So again, you can do this by hand, right? If you want to name those initially and then copy and paste them into the groups or to their respective curves and change the numbers that way, that'll also work. I just think this is a little bit faster. So I'll close that for now. Let's go ahead and parent these up to how they need to be. So, the way our finger's set up right now, right? If we grab just the joint and rotate it, it'll move all the ones underneath it. And we can work our way down that FK control style, right? I'll go ahead and undo. But we want to mimic that with our finger controls, but right now, if we grab one of them, they won't move those underneath it. So we're looking for that stair-step hierarchy, right? Just like we did with our spine controls and like we did with our FK controls for the arms. I'll just grab my index 3, the one that's going to be last, right? Hold down Shift, grab the index 2 control, so the one right above it, hit P to parent. And same thing with my index 2 group. I'll grab that first, hold down Shift, grab my index 1 control, and hit P to parent. Now, if we take a moment and look here, once again, we have that stair-step hierarchy, right? We have empty group, then a curve, empty group, then a curve, empty group, then a curve. It needs to alternate like this, right? So if I make my group a child of another group, and I go to rotate, my index curve, it's not going to move anything underneath it. But because I have that nice hierarchy going further up, if I grab my first index control, it will move everything underneath it. So I'll step back a little bit and I'll undo to that being correct. And again, the way that we can test that this works, right, is that if we grab our curve, rotate it, it should move everything underneath it. I grab my next curve and rotate it, it should move everything underneath it in the hierarchy, so on and so forth. Shouldn't work backwards, right? Again, that's just the stair-step hierarchy that we must have in order for this to work. So lastly, now that we've got these actually set up and aligned to where they need to be, we'll go ahead and orient constrain them. And let's see here. I just want to make sure that I don't have any... Nope, I don't have any rotations left in my fingers. I was just double checking. So let's go ahead and constrain those up. So again, remember, the parent constrains the child. In this case, we want our parent, our curve, to be constrained to the child, the actual finger bone. So I'll grab my index 1 control first, hold down Shift, and click on the actual joint. And again, if your girl's getting in the way, you can turn off surface selection, or even just hit the V option on our display layer to hide visibility for our objects. And I'll go up to Constrain, down to Orient, over to the Options box. I just want to make sure that Maintain Offset is on, which it is, and I'll go ahead and hit Apply. Look, our index 1 has some little blue boxes in the channel box editor, so it's got some outgoing connections. Its rotation is going to be driven by our curve. So if we click on our actual curve, right, and rotate it, now it's controlling the finger. Let's go ahead and repeat that step going down. So I'll grab my index 2 curve, hold down Shift, click on the bone, and I still have my orient constraint options up, so I'll go ahead and hit Apply. So it looks like that bone has those rotations now being controlled by our constraint. And lastly, I'll grab my index 3 control curve, hold down Shift, grab my index 3 bone, and I'll hit Add just so that window goes away. So now if I go ahead and bring back visibility for my girl's geometry, hide the joints layer, if I grab this, it should rotate my finger, which it does. Perfect. So it looks like I can grab these and move these and rotate these as I need. Because I put those on the curves right and I have, some junk rotations going on here, I can zero those out and it'll pop back to where it needs to be. Great. So that's the basis of getting some basic fingers set up. Of course, we have some more advanced stuff to do, but I'll go ahead and go through this process one more time with the middle finger, and then I'll go ahead and speed through and build those controls on the rest of the hand. Bring back my joints layer, and remember that I did hide, one of those finger joints back here. It's my group 4. And I did already snap it to the knuckle, it looks like. So I'll go ahead and just duplicate these a couple times. I'll do this in a similar order to what I just did, building the fingers out, but I'll just do it slightly differently so we can save some time. So I'll grab my group 4 and duplicate it twice. Grab my group 5, use V to snap it down to the next knuckle. I'll grab my group 6, hold down V with my move tool up again to snap it down to the knuckle further than that. So right now these all have junk on our translate, right? But our rotate is clean, so I can freeze those transforms. And I'll actually show you what might happen. So I'll go ahead and delete my group 6 just for now. Let's say that I, use my match rotations on my knuckle. Go to modify, match animations, match rotations. Duplicate this, snap it down. And let's say I don't zero these out, but I do a modify freeze transformations. Notice what happens to the pivot of my control curve. It's back to normal, right? So even though this is the case, and if I go, with my group selected and try to do another modify match transformations, match rotations, now it's going to be all off because it has that offset that we did baked into it. My pivot is again aligned with it, but the control is completely out of sorts. So I'll go ahead and step back to before I made that mistake. Again, that's why we want to zero out our rotations before we freeze those transforms, because if we bake this offset in, it'll ruin our rig. I'll undo to before I have those. Again, all of those rotations are zeroed out, so I can grab them all with shift-click, modify, freeze transformations. Now I can do that modify match rotations trick, and the pivot will be as it needs to be. So I'll grab my group 4. Again, I'm using the group, right? I don't want to grab the actual circle pin control. I don't want junk on that. But I do want my group to hold the junk, so I'll grab my group. Hold down Shift, grab the bone, modify, match transformations, match rotation. And now the circle pin is aligned to the bone, because again, that group is holding our junk for us, but the actual curve itself is nice and clean. Now next I'll go ahead and go down the line, grab my group 5, hold down Shift and grab my bone. And again, I could go up to modify, match transformations, match rotation, but I'm actually going to hit G as in go again on my keyboard, because the last thing that I did was that I matched transformations and G repeats the previous command. So I can save myself a little bit of time doing this. So I'll grab my group 6, hold down Shift and grab the bone beneath it and hit G again, because again, it'll modify match transformations, match rotations for us. because that's the last operation that we did. And clicking through, right, our group is holding that junk rotation data, but the actual circle pins themselves are still nice and clean. Let's go ahead and use Comet to rename these. So I'll open up these menus, grab my first control first, hold down Control and grab my second circle pin next, and then hold down Control and grab the third circle pin after that. And instead of using LT index in my rename and number area of Comet rename, I'll do LT underscore middle. Rename and number. So now all of those are renamed LT middle, and I'll add the suffix of underscore CTL. Now it's named up as I need. Let's repeat that step with the groups. Grab my middle one control group that's holding our junk, right? Grab that first, hold down Control, grab the next one second, hold down Control, and grab the last one third. I can again use rename and number. Again, this already has my LT middle in it, so I can just click on it and it'll make everything LT middle 1, 2, and 3. But instead of adding CTL, I will add underscore GRP. Now I will add this suffix. And now everything is named up as it needs to be. Let's go ahead and parent these up to each other, and we will constrain them, and we will have the basis of our fingers ready. Go ahead and close that. Again, we can grab our middle group first, hold down Shift, and grab the middle 2 control above it, and hit P to parent. So again, we're getting our stair-step hierarchy working, right? Control group, and then curve, our group, and then our curve. And then lastly, I'll do that for my middle one as well. So click my LT middle 2, and I've been using P this whole time, but you can also click middle mouse, click and hold middle mouse, and drag it on top of the middle one CTL, just so it is all parented up. And going through and testing, right, if I grab my CTLs over in the viewport and move them, they are affecting the other controls further on down in the hierarchy because we have that stair-step transformation hierarchy going. Good. Lastly, we'll go ahead and constrain those to each other. And I'll use that trick where I hit G on my keyboard as well for the orient constraint. So first I'll grab my middle one CTL, hold down Shift and grab the bone that I want to constrain it to. Go up to Constrain, down to Orient. And I don't need to hit the Options box because I know Maintain Offset has been checked on, right? So I'll click that. Have a blue fill in my channel box editor for the middle one control finger. So that's looking good. I'll grab my next middle 2 CTL, hold down Shift and grab the bone. And this time I'll hit G as in go again, because the last thing that I did was orient constrain, right? So it'll just do that orient constraint again with all those options that we saved just by going through less menus. Looks like I have those here in my bone as well. So I'll go ahead and grab my middle 3 CTL last, hold down Shift and grab the bone, hit G as in go again, and it looks like that orient constraint is there. I'll bring back my girl. And now I can grab these and move my fingers. It's going to test these controls out a little bit. Looks like all is well. Great. So I'll grab all of these. I'll zero out all of the rotations. And again, like we've done earlier, right, we can grab these with Shift. Like I can grab my first one, hold down Shift, and grab the previous controls on my middle finger as well. So I have all 3 of those selected. And if I rotate those, I will just get this to curl, a little bit faster since it's rotating all of those at the same time. So it's like the very first thing that we went over in rigging, right, is what happens if we do multiple selection types. But that is how you get some finger control set up. I will go ahead and repeat this process. I might duplicate my middle 3 group, Shift P to unparent it. And I'll go ahead and take this extra curve, snap it to the knuckle, zero out its transforms so it's standing back up, modify freeze transforms, and I'll go ahead and work through the rest of the hand using those tactics that we just went through. I'll just speed up a little bit because again I did do that 6 times here. I feel like you should probably have the idea down now, but I will speed up through the video. We'll time lapse. You can still watch if you really want to, but yeah, I'm going to do that to save both time for me and time for you. So I'll go ahead and accelerate and see you on the other side. right, so I have the fingers lined up here. There is one thing that I want to point out on the girl specifically, is that my joint orientation is technically wrong here. You might have seen me taking a peek at it earlier, but if we take a look at the rotation axes, right, my Y is not pointed off of the bone here. So this might have been something that I wanted to have caught and fixed before, but now we can see where it might not help us a lot. It's not world breaking, right? But if you look at the rotations or how the rotation manipulator looks, right? They have access to my what's the best way to describe this? Basically, the Z is pointing with the bone here, but the Y is pointing along the bone there. So if I grab these and rotate them both, I get a slightly weirder rotation, which, that's fine, but that might cause some issues if I were an animator. Just that I'd have to rotate two different axes separately. So it's not the worst, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, that's the status of things there. I'm going to leave it in just so we can see what a mistake might do for our rig. But yeah, that's setting up the first part of the hand controls. There's one last thing that I want to do, because right now if I take my FK controls and move them right, they don't go with. We're getting a pretty weird looking transformation. The last thing is to create a little control that both of these can live under, and regardless of whether we're in IK or FK mode, that they'll go with. And keep in mind that as I'm switching between these, right, there is a little bit of that pop. When you get this set up, stick with whatever mode that you're in before we, add our constraints. Because now if I switch between these two, now these are slightly off from our bones. Now if you look right, it's not quite lined up, so I will go back to my FK where I have these set up. We'll get them so that they'll move with it. Just keep in mind that we don't want to switch between, our IK FK switch while we're working on these. So let's go ahead and get that last control set up, and we'll see how it works. So let's go ahead and grab our control curves again. And what I'm looking for this time is I'm looking for a square pin instead of a circle pin. So I'll scroll down, find square pin, put it on the origin by clicking origin. And this behaves a lot like our previous one, right? What I'll do is I'll go ahead and solo this with Control 1 or Isolate Select, right click and go into Control Vertex mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this, and with my scale tool selected, I'm going to make this just a little bit wider, as well as scoot it down in space a little bit. And again, this is purely aesthetic. This isn't going to change how our control works. I just wanted to make this a little bit easier for me to use, and we might take a look at it again once we get it aligned. But I'll go ahead and unisolate select, turn off my girl's geo, and I'm going to hold down V, and what I want to do is I want to snap this to the hand bone, not the wrist, right? Like I don't want to go up here, I want to snap it to the hand bone, because that hand bone is going to move for us no matter if we're in IK or FK mode, and that will allow us to move our finger controls with it. But again, like the other things, I'm also going to, maybe smush this down a little bit more, scale it down just a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the y-axis. So when we match rotations, that this will do what it needs to do. Now that I've got this, scaled how I'd like it and rotated where I need to be after snapping it in space, I'll again modify freeze transformations. And I'll go ahead and rename this while I'm here. I'll make this my LT hand underscore CTL and group it with Control G. And just like previously, I'll match those pivots. So I can either hit D on my keyboard and use V to drag it up to the exact same spot, like this, or we could also grab our group first, hold down Shift, and grab the hand CTL, which has the pivot that we want. Go up to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Pivots. And I'll go ahead and rename this group to, my LT hand CTL underscore group. Ooh, actually, that's a good point. I did ignore my naming conventions for the rest of the hands here. And the good thing about, comment rename is that I can very quickly fix this because I didn't add my lowercase CTL before the group. So I can just shift select everything, use select hierarchy to grab everything underneath it, and in my joint rename tool, search for underscore GRP and replace it with underscore CTL underscore GRP. Search and replace. And now that's named how it needs to be. Cool. And no big deal, right? That's why comment is so good. And, that wouldn't have broken our rig, but I do like to follow those same naming conventions. Anyways, back to the hand. We'll use that modify match transformations again. So I'll grab my group, hold down Shift and grab my hand bone, modify, match transformations, match rotation. So now I have this little thing coming off our hand, and it'll make sense why we're doing this. I might even, go into the control vertex mode and move this down a little bit closer to the hand. Okay, that'll work. So I'm going to do another constraint. I'm going to do a parent constraint, but I'm going to do this in the opposite order that we usually do. And I'm going to do it just like a little bit more strangely than what we usually do. I'm going to constrain the control group to the hand bone. So the hand bone movements will cause this group to move with us. So I'll go ahead and hide my girl's geometry again. So I want to start by clicking the girl's hand bone, holding down control, and going over here and grabbing my hand group. I'll go up to constrain, down to parent, and over to the options box. Make sure maintain offset is on, as per usual, and go ahead and add. So now I should see a constraint under here, under my hand control group. So now if you notice, if I grab my switch, I'll even bring my girl's geo back for this, and I toggle my switch back to 0, my hand control will move with it, right? So now what we can do is that we can grab our hand control and we can parent all of our fingers to this hand control. So I'll go up here, grab my index 1 control group, hold down Shift, and grab everything underneath or down to the thumb 1 control group. And I'll hold down middle mouse, click and drag it down to be on top of my hand CTL. Again, we're getting our stair-step hierarchy, right? So we have control curve, or a control group, curve, an empty group, then a curve, and that's still following the way down. So now the way this works, right, is that if we move our FK controls, it's passing that onto the hand, so now our fingers will move with it. Even if we pop back from, our FK mode to IK mode, it'll still move over, and our fingers will still, follow that transform and move with it. So we can't move this hand control now, right? Like it may look like we can't move the hand group rather, because it's constrained. So if we move around, it'll pop back, and we'll even look at hiding some of this for us now once we get to building our grip controls. But again, basically the way that this works is we can pass those transforms from the hand bone, which isn't part of our switch, to our hand control group, which will then pass those on to the fingers, so they'll move with them. But yeah, that is the first part of setting up our grip controls. Next we'll setting up our hand controls rather. Next we'll take a look at building a little custom slider for a grip, so we can very quickly open and close our girl's hand. So we'll go ahead and pause it there. This will be the first part of building those controls, and we'll take a look at the second video here in just a moment. So see you then.